Peter says, "You know her in a different way from me. See Celia for me. And you were so much older." Edward says, "So much older?" Peter says, "Yes, I'm sure that she would listen to you as someone disinterested." Edward says, "Well, I will see Celia." Peter says, "Thank you, Edward. It's very good of you." Alex enters with his jacket on, and Alex says, "Oh, Edward, I prepared you such a treat. I really think that, of all my triumphs, this is the greatest, to make something out of nothing. Never, even when traveling in Albania, have I made such a supper out of so few materials." "As I found in your refrigerator, but of course I was lucky to find half a dozen eggs." And Edward says, "You used all those eggs? Lavinia's aunt has just sent them from the country." And Alex says, "Oh, so the aunt really exists? A substantial proof." Edward says, No, I mean, this is another aunt." Alex says, "I understand, the real aunt, but you'll be grateful. There are very few peasants in Montenegro who can have this dish that you'll be eating nowadays." Edward says, "But what about my breakfast?" Alex says, "Don't worry about breakfast. All you should want is a cup of black coffee and a little dry toast. I've left it simmering. Don't leave it longer than another 10 minutes. Now I'll be going, and I'll take Peter with me." Peter says, "Edward, I've taken too much of your time, and you want to be alone. Give my love to Lavinia when she comes back, but if you don't mind, I'd rather you didn't tell her what I've told you." And it seems to me that turmeric tastes significantly different in its, raw form. But it requires something like 50 degrees or so at night at all times. Or, starts to die even if it gets below 50, which is... Peter says, "Thank you, Edward. Good night." Edward says, "Good night, Peter. And good night, Alex. Oh, and if you don't mind, please shut the door after you so that it latches. Remember, Edward, not more than 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and my work will be ruined." And Alex and Peter exit. Edward picks up the telephone, dials a number, and says, "Is Miss Celia Copplestone in?" "How long ago?" "No, it doesn't matter." And the curtain draws. We have another scene in the same room. A quarter hour later, Edward is alone playing Patience. The doorbell rings, and he goes to answer that. Patience is a song of some sort. Celia's voice. "Are you alone?" Edward returns with Celia. Edward says, "Celia, why have you come back? I said I would telephone as soon as I could, and I tried to get you a short while ago." Celia says, "If there had happened to be anyone with you, I was going to say I'd come back for my umbrella. I must say, you don't seem very pleased to see me. Edward, I understand what has happened, but I could not understand your manner on the telephone. It did not seem quite like you. So I felt I must see you. Tell me it's all right, and then I'll go." Edward says, "But how can you say you understand what has happened? I don't know what has happened or what is going to happen, and I try to understand it. I want to be alone." Celia says, "I should have thought it was perfectly simple. Lavinia has left you." Edward says, "Yes, that was the situation. I suppose it was pretty obvious to everyone." Celia says, "It was obvious that the aunt was a pure invention, on the spur of a moment, and not a very good one. You should have been prepared with something better for Julia, but it doesn't really matter. They will know soon enough. Doesn't that settle all our difficulties? Now, you can be silent on a matter, but there's no need to lie in situations, Edward says, "It has only brought to light the real difficulties." Celia says, "But surely these are only temporary. I accepted the situation because a divorce would ruin your career. And we thought that Lavinia would never want to leave you. Surely you don't hold to that silly convention." that the husband must always be the one to be divorced. And if she chooses you, to give you the grounds. Edward says, I see, but it's not like that at all. Lavinia is coming back. And decency in relationships like that, it should be something more than just, oh, well, I'm going to be decent because I love them enough now. It's like, or not betray my trust and contracts or whatnot. No, it shouldn't be like that. See, but Lavinia's coming back. Celia says, Lavinia coming back? Do you mean to say that she's laid a trap for us? Edward says, no, if there's a trap, we are all in the trap. We have set it for ourselves, but I don't know what kind of trap it is. Celia says, then what has happened? The telephone rings. Edward says, damn the telephone, I suppose I must answer it. Hello? Oh, hello? No. I mean, yes, Alex. Yes, of course. It was marvelous. I've never tasted quite anything like it. Yes, it's very interesting. But I just wondered whether it mightn't be rather indigestible. Yeah, probably too much turmeric. Oh no, Alex, don't bring me any cheese. I've got some cheese. No, not Norwegian. But I don't really want cheese. Slipper what? Oh, from Yugoslavia? Prunes and alcohol? No, really, Alex. I don't want anything. I'm very tired. Thanks awfully, Alex. Good night. Celia says, what on earth was that about? Edward says, that was Alex. Celia says, I know it was Alex, but what was he talking of? Edward says, I had quite forgotten. He made his way in a little while ago and insisted on cooking me something for supper, and he said, I must eat it within 10 minutes. I suppose it's still cooking. Celia says, you suppose it's still cooking? I thought I noticed a peculiar smell, and of course it's still cooking, or doing something. I must go and investigate. Sarah starts to leave the room, and Edward says, for heaven's sake, don't bother. And Celia leaves. Suppose someone came and found you in the kitchen. Edward goes over to the table and expects his game of patience. He moves a card. The doorbell rings repeatedly. Celia re-enters in an apron. And Celia says, you better answer the door, Edward. It's the best thing to do. Don't lose your head. You see, I really didn't leave my umbrella. And I'll say, I found you here, starving and helpless, and had to do something. Anyways, I'm staying, and I'm not going to hide. And returns to the kitchen. The bell rings again. Edward goes to the front door and is heard to say, Julia, what you been come back for? And Julia enters and says, I've had an inspiration. And Celia enters with a saucepan, and Celia says, Edward, it's ruined. Edward says, what a good thing. But it's ruined the saucepan, too. Edward says, and half a dozen eggs. I wanted one for breakfast, Edward says. Boiled egg. It's the only thing I know how to cook. And Celia says, well, you can find the spots that aren't ruined, usually. Julia says, Celia, I see you've had the same inspiration that I had. Edward must be fed. He's under such a strain. He must keep his strength up. Edward, don't